Hi and welcome to this very short episode 6, day 7 of my journey, and also the day of Rose's arrival at Bilbao Airport. Now, during this, as I say, very short episode, I just try and justify how I actually managed to lose my document case. Now, Rose's flight was actually due in at 6:30 p.m. I, however, was still in Pamplona, 160 kilometres away now, and minus my bike and laptop. Due to the events of the previous day, Friday the 13th, I'd ended up staying here rather than in my pre-booked hotel in Santa Liana del Mar. I've managed to contact the hotel the night before just to let them know that I wouldn't be arriving, but it did assure them that we'd be with them that night. However, the hotel check-in was due to close at 8 p.m, so I now had the added pressure of collecting the keys before returning to Bilbao Airport. When I finally arrived at Enterprise Car Rental that morning, the car I'd actually booked, or the AA had actually booked, had actually been given to somebody else as it was due to be collected the previous evening, but at least I did actually get one after a lengthy delay. Being a Saturday, the BMW garage in Bilbao was due to close at 2 p.m, so I headed there directly to collect the hire bike, which turned out to be a F800 GS. I arrived, and by the time I'd completed the paperwork, paid the €420, they were all ready to lock up. It was then back into the hire car and back to Bilbao Airport to actually drop it off before getting a taxi back to collect the bike, keys in hand. It was now around about 2:30, and by my calculations I had a 3-hour round trip to the hotel, and the drive through Bilbao, the traffic wasn't great at all, and I was conscious of the time, so a massive queue entering a tunnel was the last thing I needed. Traffic from the opposite direction had obviously been diverted elsewhere, so the oncoming lane was clear. However, there was an illuminated red cross right above it. But I was on a bike, I could just filter, right? As I passed the stationary queue, one car seemed to deliberately pull out to block me. I just swerved around it and silently cursed, and continued now in the middle of the lane, just in case. It was then that I noticed the police car up in front, and I was directed to pull over. Documents checked and a tense wait while the officers talked in a huddle. I was eventually waved on my way with a verbal warning. I was now seriously behind schedule, but undeterred, cracked on with my journey. About 20 minutes away from the hotel, I noticed my phone's battery was about to die, and along with it all form of navigation. But at least the bike had a USB port, so I pulled off the motorway and stopped on the forecourt of a bar cum restaurant. All the cables were in the document case, so I retrieved it from my back box and struggled for what seemed like an absolute age to set it up. Hot and flustered, and allowing for up to 20 minutes for check-in at the hotel, my revised arrival time at the airport was now around 6:30 when Rose's flight was actually due. At check-in, I was asked to produce my passport. However, due to my haste, they agreed to complete the formalities in the morning, providing I confirmed payment, which I did. They did give me a 50% discount on the previous night's booking, which obviously I hadn't arrived for. Eventually, I reached arrivals at Bilbao Airport, only to discover Rose's flight had actually been delayed by an hour. At least I was in the air-conditioned environment of the arrival lounge, and it also gave me some time to get on board some much-needed fluids. After all the rush, time seemed to go slowly now, so I decided to get ahead of the game and get back to my bike and get my passport out of the document case and put it in my jacket. This is where panic ensued. as it dawned on me that my case was no longer in my back box. I checked my panniers, I checked the bag, actually on the back of the bike, but it was nowhere to be seen. I remember taking it out, finding the right cable and plugging my phone in, but then it was just all a blank. I could only conclude that it was back at the bar/restaurant where I pulled off the motorway, and I can still even now feel that feeling in the pit of my stomach as I recalled the contents. My passport, my Bike V5 document, my memory cards with all my trip footage on so far, my portable hard drive, my cables, my batteries, the list just went on. I returned to the arrivals lounge feeling somewhat sick. I then saw Rose. She greeted me with a great big smile and gave me a hug. I was just wondering how I was actually going to explain what had happened, but I really needn't have worried. She was just full of support. I, on the other hand, felt a total plonker. Rose had had her own issues with the journey. Wearing her bike jeans through security had not been the best of ideas, as the knee and hip armour had actually raised suspicions, resulting in her being led into a side room for a full body search. Having tried in vain on the way back to locate my document case, we eventually arrived at the hotel at gone midnight. The hotel was, however, truly amazing, as was Santillana del Mar. Very quaint and heavily cobbled streets and wooden buildings nestled in the dip. The following morning, back at reception, we were relieved to find an incredible young lady called Irene, who spoke perfect English, albeit with an American accent. She was so sympathetic as I explained what had taken place, and took on the role of interpreter and resourcer. During conversation, I actually asked Irene what part of the state she was from, and she then replied that she'd actually never been to the States and that she was Spanish. She'd actually learnt her English watching American TV and was a particular fan of the series Friends. Irene was able to phone the bar where I thought I'd actually lost my case, but nothing had been handed in. They even took the effort to go outside and actually check the car park. She then gave us the address of a local police station which would be open. It was Sunday at this point, where we could actually report the loss. She also gave us her mobile number, which proved invaluable. So after breakfast and a walk around the town, we carried on to the police station. 2 hours later, and now fully acquainted with Google Translate, we left the police station with a police report. The officer had phoned my hotel in Pamplona to actually get my passport number, as I didn't have a clue what it was. Just note to self for future reference, I now carry a photograph of my passport when travelling abroad. Now, whilst the past couple of days have been challenging, to say the least, I have been reminded just how kind some people can be. Total strangers. There was the party guy in Pamplona who actually called a cab for me so I could get enterprise car rental. There was also Etienne. Etienne was a incredibly generous guy. I met him at the BMW garage in Pamplona. This was on the Friday after my bike had actually broken down. Etienne overheard a lot of the conversations I'd actually had with the AA, and I'd reported back to him, what was going on. They were going to send a bike. Then he heard me chase over the next 4 or 5 hours. And at the end of the 6-hour period, he could see I was just more than a bit dejected when I reported back that no, I either had to sort the bike out myself or they could arrange a hire car and I would have to ride the Picos with Rose in a car. At this point, Etienne actually said, look, not a problem, you can borrow my bike. He was prepared to lend me, a total stranger, his bike so I could actually ride the Picos, bringing it back on Tuesday when my bike should be ready and I could then actually go on my way. Thankfully at this point, and to save my blushes, BMW actually stepped in at this stage and managed to locate a bike that I could hire actually in Bilbao. So Etienne was free to carry on with his trip. He actually lived in Spain but was actually French. And I couldn't thank him enough as he actually left and returned on his journey. Then there was Irene. Irene actually worked at the hotel in Santillana del Mar, and as I mentioned earlier, she spoke perfect English. She actually went well over and above. She actually made telephone calls for us. She searched the internet and found out what I needed to do with regard to police reports. Subsequently then I'd need to get in contact with the embassy. But again, Irene, fantastic person. None of these people needed to do this, and it really does restore your faith in humanity. So that's the end of this not so brief short episode. I really just wanted to explain what was happening during the journey. These things do happen, unfortunately. I know that there's no exciting footage during that 2-day period. To be honest, putting the camera on was the last thing on my mind. So I've just actually infilled with some relevant photographs. But anyway, coming up in the next episode, you actually join us as Rose and I leave the police station and head towards the Picos de Europa and Potes.